Hi, everyone. This is Martin Ramirez, co founder and CEO of Signify. I'm here with David Hammond, who has over 25 years of experience in FDA regulated fields. He began his career as a clinical research coordinator before transitioning to the medical device industry, specializing in Class 3 medical device trials. After a series of roles in medical device companies, he became a consultant for biotechnology firms in 2008. Currently, David is a regulatory and clinical research consultant in private practice and an associate teaching professor and academic director of the BRAMS program at the University of Washington. Very lucky to have you here, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Very exciting times in all things regulatory. As you know, we are newer entrants, just IT and AI nerds who see an opportunity to hopefully be of help. But today is all about your perspective. I know you have a very unique point of view in the sense that you're helping train the future regulatory affair experts of our industry. So I will let you take it from there and tell us a little bit more about the academic lens and what's happening in the University of Washington in all things regulatory affairs.
Sure. So we have a master's program at the University of Washington. It started as a couple of certificates 25, 26 years ago. Really, the issue was that local companies, primarily Philips at the time, was having trouble finding regulatory professionals, and they were having to basically import them from California, from the East Coast, from Minneapolis region, which had some pretty strong regulatory. And they worked with some of the people at the university to set up an opportunity to do postgraduate training.
Mm.
And so a certificate started, like I said, way back in 1998, I think was their first class. It was Dr. Tom Hazlett and Martha Feldman were the first instructors in this program. That one spun out a second certificate in clinical research that turned into a master's degree in 2009. I've been teaching in the program since 2005, just bits and pieces of it. So this is, I think, year number 19. I teach a number of classes in clinical research, some in reg affairs, and then I work with what we call our practicum, which is our big capstone project the students
Mm.
have to complete to graduate. We changed directors a few years ago when our original director retired. Our interim director, Andy Sturgachis, was with us for a couple of years, and then when he went back to his regular job, which was doing 17 other things at the University of Washington, I got promoted to the academic director, and so which is really just turns out to be doing a whole bunch of paperwork and budgeting stuff that's so much fun to do. But I stuck with this program. I didn't really think that I would get into education. I
Mm.
think if you ask my parents, of my two sisters and I, who was the most likely one to end up as an academic, it was not me. I was not a gifted student or, well, motivated student, I guess you would say, in my undergraduate years. And I fell into this field entirely by mistake. I started teaching as a fill in for Martha Feldman. She asked me to come in and do a couple of guest lectures. And when she just got to be too busy to
Mm.
continue to do this, she asked me if I would be willing to take on her half a quarter, and then a half a quarter became a quarter and a half, and now it's 5 or 6 classes and all of these other things. And it's turned out that I really do enjoy teaching. I enjoy the students, I enjoy the environment. And so it's turned
Mm.
into something that I would not have thought of myself as for a career, but here we
That's
are.
how it goes. Yeah, that's
Exactly.
fascinating. And in terms of the background and demographics, this being a graduate program, where are most of your students coming from? Which discipline serve as the base for getting a master's in regulatory?
They sort of tend to fall into a couple of categories. We have students who are already in the industry in some way. Maybe they're working in QC, maybe they're working in the lab on manufacturing. They're just starting their career in clinical research or reg affairs, and they want formal training. A lot of us started with on the job training. This is how I learned to do the entire job. And on the job is great in that you're getting paid while you do it, which is, it's a nice thing. The problem is that you're kind of trained in a very specific siloed area. I started out in antibiotics, and then I worked in drugs for rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. So that was what I knew. I knew drugs, I knew those two particular fields, and I knew very particular stages of drug development. And I learned it a particular way. I learned it my trainer's way of doing things, not necessarily the right way, but their way of doing it. Um, And so we have people that are starting in these areas and they want to expand their area. They maybe want to move out of the lab. They want to move out of QC. They want to get promoted. And that's sort of that other group is that in a lot of companies, you don't need a master's degree to get into regulatory affairs. There's a lot of people out there that just do it with a bachelor's degree, and that's how I started. But what we're seeing is that more and more frequently to get promoted, to move up the ladder, to move to management, to the director and the VP level, especially in larger companies, there's a requirement for an advanced degree. I mean, it may be an MBA, it may be an MHA, but why not get a master's in regulatory affairs since that's your field? So we have those sorts of people, and that's where some of our students come from. But the other half are people who did something else and they want to change. We have individuals who may be trained as a dentist or trained as a pharmacist or trained as a clinician, a nurse, and they want to do something different with their career. And we see this a lot with students from outside the US, especially students who have licensure in their country that does not transfer into the US. And they don't want to lose or waste all of this medical education and these years of experience that they have, but they don't want to have to go through the process of getting relicensed in the US. And they look around and they think that working for the companies that develop the products might be a good use of their experience. So we get that kind of mix of brand new to the field and people who are just looking for a broader education and to move up.
But is it correct to say that across the body of your students, you have a foundation in the sciences? Like where these are individuals who come from STEM programs and they're now contextualizing that for regulatory affairs as a discipline in the industry. Is that fair, or am I missing something there?
No, I would say that most of our students do come from a STEM background. My undergraduate degree was in life sciences. Many of ours were in healthcare, other things. I do want to clarify
Mm,
because, and I also have to say this because the individual who's in charge of our practicum and one of my earliest students in the master's degree always likes to point out that her undergraduate degree was in English,
okay,
and she's absolutely one of the sharpest regulatory people I've ever worked with. And certainly
that's
she
great.
writes better than a lot of them. But
Mm.
yes, the most of them come from medicine, they come from tech, they come from science.
And I do have a few questions around the career path that you mentioned, but before
Sure.
getting to that, what are the core tenets of the curriculum? What are they learning, and how is the program making them a better regulatory affairs once they go back to industry?
So regulatory affairs, it's sort of there are three kind of major areas in regulatory. One is what we consider to be sort of straight regulatory. So these are things like regulatory submissions, dealing with agencies, dealing with labeling and promotion practices. There's quality, and quality is quality systems, quality manufacturing, putting correct procedures in place. And then there's clinical research. And our program, we do what we sort of jokingly refer to as a 3x3 approach.
Hmm.
So not only do we teach you those three basic tenets of regulatory, so when you leave the program, you understand how to practice, again, what we call traditional regulatory, quality systems, quality manufacturing, good manufacturing practices, and you have experience in clinical research. We taught you the rules and the ethics and how to design the studies and this sort of thing. The other thing is that we also make sure that they have broad exposure in terms of product types, because drugs and devices, biologics, and really even beyond this into things like dietary supplements and cosmetics, they all have their own sets of regulations. And while some experience crosses over fairly well, a lot of it doesn't. So we teach you the three big product types: drugs, biologics, and medical devices.
Hmm.
And we teach you the three major areas, which are regulatory, quality, and clinical research. So a student that comes in doesn't just focus on one thing. They don't just learn
Hmm.
to do clinical research. They get a broad spectrum, and especially because the companies in the greater Seattle area are small,
Hmm.
most of your regulatory people don't get to focus on just one activity.
Right.
They're also called on to deal with the FDA, to deal with quality, maybe to help out with clinical research. And so having a broader educational exposure is really useful to them.
And once they go back to industry and starting as a junior RA professional, what is the pattern that you're seeing in that career progression from junior entry level to where does it go from there? What are the opportunities for people who are considering pursuing education in this field?
Sure. So, if you go into sort of straight regulatory, a lot of people who don't have any experience start out as a regulatory associate or regulatory assistant. The terminology kind of varies from company to company. The title of the job doesn't necessarily change. I've seen regulatory associates with 20 years of experience in the
Oh,
field. They keep the title. They're just their portfolio of what they do grows, and of course their salary goes along
Hmm.
with that. You tend, once you get into this, to specialize either by choice. You find a thing that's interesting. For example, maybe your interest is in promotional materials, and so you're handling the advertising, the communications, that sort of thing that a company does. Or maybe your interest is really in regulatory submissions, the US or the rest of the world. And again, sometimes that's a personal choice, and sometimes
Hmm.
you just kind of end up
It
there.
happens.
You
Yeah.
know, your job has you doing this, and you get good at it, and you just keep going. Some of them move into management. I've got a number of students, especially ones that graduated a few years ago, that have moved into manager roles or director roles.
Hmm.
It sort of depends. Not everybody wants to be that leader. Some of them want to be an individual contributor. Some of them love to be a
Hmm.
leader.
Hmm.
They like to manage people. They like to train. And so it kind of depends. But we tend to see that people that come out with really almost no experience before they came into the program, they are starting in that regulatory assistant or that junior regulatory associate position. Within 2 or 3 years, they tend to have moved up to a kind of a full regulatory associate, sometimes into the world of project management, and then up from there. Like I said, students that have been out of the
Hmm.
program 5, 7, 8 years, they're often into leadership positions.
Gotcha.
Clinical research flows pretty much the same way. Again, it depends whether they want to stay with the research facilities, the Fred
Hmm.
Hutches, the Swedish, the University of Washington, or they want to move to industry because the jobs are different, but it's that same progression. A lot of what the field gives you is they want to see experience, they want to see work experience doing these things,
Hmm.
but to get that foot in the door and to have that knowledge to get you in the door in the first place, that's where the education is important.
Gotcha. Is there any portion of your graduates who go to the regulatory side of the equation, as in working for an FDA, for example, or
Sure.
EU, whatever applicable notified body, or are they mostly going to the maker of the products and services that are regulated?
So most of the students go to the makers. They go to the
Okay,
product developers, mostly because that's where a lot of the jobs are.
gotcha.
But we've had students every year who've gone to work not only for the FDA, but for Health Canada, to regulatory
Oh,
agencies in other countries, such as in Taiwan or in Japan. I believe we've even sent them to Korea,
that's great.
Australia, and the Middle East. So, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
that's a far less common sort of
Mm-hmm.
activity to get into. We found that to be especially valuable for students who had prior clinical training, so people that were pharmacists, were dentists, were physicians, especially outside the U.S., and veterinarians for some reason. The agencies love to hire veterinarians, but
Mm-hmm.
those are ones that we often find end up working for agencies.
Right on. And Dave, thinking about a different topic that is everywhere we look now, it's AI, artificial intelligence, and this is something certainly close to heart to us here at Signify. We are an AI company. We're part of the Allen AI Institute, the incubator side as well. And when I personally think about AI as an IT person, I'm thinking about optimizations that we can perform against information systems, processing of documentation, and the like. When we think about AI in medical device, that's a whole different field. The implications of the value and the implications of the risks are orders of magnitude higher than if I miscalculated which line to say next in a document. So, what can you tell me about AI in medical device? What are you seeing from your perspective? We'd love to hear your take on that.
And the timing of this is fortuitous. I just yesterday submitted, in conjunction with one of my graduate students and two people from Microsoft Research, an article to the RAPS journal on AI in medical devices, or what we refer to as MLMDs, or machine learning medical devices. I knew I was going to get that abbreviation wrong. So AI has been used for a number of years, not so much in the device, but in the development of. A lot of these devices use complex algorithms to make determinations, to make decisions, to provide guidance or instruction. And AI is used to mine the data to help fine tune that algorithm so that it's smarter and better than it was before. But that's that sandbox use. And really, the future of AI is, as you and I have talked about, I think as people are recognizing, is that put the AI into a device as it leaves the market, as it leaves the company and goes to market, so that it's available and that device can sort of learn as it goes. This is a really tricky area with the FDA, because one of the things that you learn, I think, in day one in quality systems is this idea that you want consistent product. Product one should be exactly the same as product 1000, the same as product 1 million. That's the idea of a quality system. It's consistent process, it's consistent product. And with AI, of course, these things are going to learn. And as they learn, they're going to change. And that's the reality of this. And so if they're all using centralized, a centralized server, a centralized brain, I guess is the wrong word to use, but that sort of thing, then they're all changing in the same way, but they're still changing. If they're not connected, then they're all changing in different directions. So now 100,000 devices, based on the data that they're getting in the use scenarios, are going in 100,000 different directions. And this is really tricky because how do you catch when a device is starting to go off the rails, when it's gotten bad data, it's making bad decisions? And this is where there's kind of this interesting crossover. And again, this is something that we talk about in this article, which hopefully will be out, I think, in the fall edition of the journal, is this idea that when we look at medical device, we do a risk analysis, we make decisions about a device for a particular use case for a particular type of patient when used in a certain way in compliance with its operating instructions. And we think about risk in this way. One of the things that I learned in writing this, working with the Microsoft team, was that AI as a whole looks at risk much more broadly because AI is it's not a generic tool, but it's a generalizable tool, one that you can apply to lots of things. And so you're thinking about not only how would it work in a medical device, but how would it work in a biologics facility? How would it work in in a weapons manufacturer? How would it work anywhere? And so you start thinking about the ethics and how these things can sort of change. And there are two sets of risk analyses that don't overlap very well. And so we have to sort of break it down and say, okay, how do we apply this, what they're thinking about with AI, this much broader umbrella to into a medical device? And what we're finding is that the FDA, and to give them credit, the FDA is always a little bit, they're slow, they're cautious when they make decisions, when they issue guidances, and they'll issue a lot of sort of forward-thinking statements and documents, but they don't make decisions quickly because they kind of want to see where things are going before they try to draw lines in the sand. And you're just starting to see coming out of the FDA discussions about machine learning medical devices and controls that need to be put into place. ISO standards around medical devices are just starting to implement AI. And so I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is that there's going to be a lot of gray. The FDA is going to struggle with what to do with these things. There's going to be a lot of new pathways going through. And until firm rules are written, we're going to end up doing a lot of what we call sort of precedent hunting. We're going to look for predicates. We're going to look for how the FDA has handled other products. But I think that it's coming. There's nothing that can be done about this. AI is going into medical devices, and the AI and the FDA has to figure out a way to regulate this. And so that's going to be a big it's going to be a big step for them. I wish I had a simple answer, but nobody does.
It is fascinating because, and I'm speaking again, not by any means from the perspective of a regulatory expert, but thinking about the technology, right? You can have, under the definition of quality you presented, right? Like device 1000 can architecturally be the same as the first one. The data and the quality of the data and the relevancy of the data for the patients or whatever the device has gathered will end up producing different outputs, right? So the consistency might not even be the architecture and the technology in itself, but rather the outputs that it generates, which is an interesting catch-22 because you will argue now you have a more personalized medical device, but where is the boundary, right? Like where it goes beyond personalization and is doing more harm or adding more risk than delivering value. It's a very difficult conversation to sort out for certain.
It is. And one of the things that we run into is, it depends on the sort of use of the device. I mean, clinical decision support software, which is something people point to a lot, is there's always what we call the learned intermediary in between. The software may give the clinician, the nurse, the PA, whomever it happens to be, advice about, the patient, you may want to do this, or it looks like the patient's blood levels are changing this way, and it might be time to consider this sort of test. But the doctor has to make the decision. They're that learned intermediary. And the same thing we see in the world of pharmacy. The software may say these two drugs may be incompatible, or the patient shouldn't take these two drugs together because it's They're going to start to compound. But the pharmacist is the expert. They went to pharmacy
Hmm.
school. And
Hmm.
so there's this ability to override. Where it really gets dangerous is when you're dealing with untrained individuals. So
Hmm.
home use devices, things that a person is
Hmm.
going to interact with without that learned intermediary in there.
Right.
So that, yeah, when the answers start to change, the physician can say, whoa, 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 no, 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 that's not the appropriate thing to do. It's missing a piece of information. It's misinterpreting something.
Hmm.
The
Right.
individual at home, we get trusting. I mean, I don't know how many times I have taken a wrong turn because my smartphone has told me, turn right here, get on the freeway, and now I'm stuck in a traffic jam. We don't think, we just listen to what it has
Right.
to say.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that it's a bigger concern is that the stuff is starting to move into places where people are interacting. And we see this in students, we see this in the
Hmm.
news. People use AI
Hmm.
and they don't think. There was that lovely the legal case where the guy basically submitted something to a judge that had how many completely made up precedents that were, and then he claimed that he used AI to check whether those
Hmm.
precedents were actually real or not, which seems like sort of a bad idea to use AI to check AI. But the point being that they didn't bother to do the research, and the number of things that I hear people say to me, "Well, I searched this, and the AI part of the search engine, whatever it happens to be,
Hmm.
whether it's Google or Microsoft or whoever, told me this because it's attempting to summarize to make it easier. And for
Hmm.
some things, it does a perfectly good job, but sometimes the answers are just wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so like I said, when you don't know any better, you just sort of take what it says.
Right. Yeah. I'm remaining extremely optimistic about the value that it can generate, and I think not only from uh, the computational advancements that we have, but the integrity of the outputs, getting to a conclusion sooner, having that intelligence deployed as close to the action where those decisions needs to be made. I think it's a great evolution of computing in general. I do believe, again, particularly once we're speaking about a medical device or other higher risk implementations, there's a lot to learn. And if I can borrow from the FDA lingo, we might not have a predicate today because it's literally an innovation. So we're seeing how it goes.
And no, and that's the reality is that it is in the long run going to be beneficial. There's bumps in the short run, and this is what we
Hmm.
run into.
Right.
Like I said, this case that that keeps coming up when we talk about AI, it was I think it was more of an outlier than it was a sort of standard example of how this stuff is used. But we will get there. And the truth is that software can do more. I mean, the AI is going to be able to do more than we can. I laugh. I just retook a biostats course a year ago. And when I learned it in college a very long time ago,
Mm.
we did all this stuff manually because the software, I mean, you had to do all this crazy hard coding into like Excel to make it
Mm.
calculate. And now they don't even bother to teach. They're like, yeah, this is the formula, but don't bother. Just put it into Minitab or whatever the software is because the computer's faster and better at
Yeah.
it than you are. And we're going to see the same thing with AI. We just, we need to get there.
Yeah. I hear you. And innovation is one of the catalysts to regulatory changes. There is
Mhm.
also better data evidence, things that occur post market. One of the things that I quickly learned when I jump into this new journey that we're going through is how much change. Even though from the outside it might be easy to be a little bit of a cynic and say these regulations never change, but even if the corpus of the regulation remains, the interpretation, the guidance, how it's been implemented in industry, there's a lot of entropy when it comes to the regulatory landscape. What are you seeing from your perspective? What are some of the key considerations when thinking about that ever-changing regulatory landscape?
One of the first things we teach the students is that if you look at a new regulation that the FDA has issued, a new section of the CFR, it's always in response to something. The FDA is a very
Mm.
responsive agency. Something bad happens, the FDA changes a rule. Something bad happens, the FDA changes a rule. And that was sort of in the old days before these things have sort of expanded out. The reality is now the FDA is having to respond to lots of things. So it's not only
Mm.
to bad things that occur with patients, things that you hear about in the news, but again, all of these rules around machine learning and AI are coming because this is where companies want to go. This is what makes the tech better. The
Hmm.
FDA has to come up with the rules for it. But you deal with financial realities. Drugs get to be too expensive. The therapies can't be manufactured fast enough. We see this today with some of these weight loss medications that they can't be manufactured fast enough, and the FDA has to rethink these things. Um, we're dealing with two of the big ones that have just popped up recently that are, I'm seeing with some of my companies that I work with, is the FDA has just put out some early guidance on how a company can respond to social media. So when somebody has
Wow.
posted to social media about, I don't like this product, or this product is
Hmm.
completely safe, or whatever they want to say, things that are incorrect,
Hmm.
the company was always in a tough place, the manufacturer, which has a responsibility to say only things that are, correct and cleared by the FDA. How do you respond to this? And the FDA has
Hmm.
put out guidance about how to respond, when you should respond, what you should say, how you should deal with this. And again, this is because the market has gone in a different direction. We're now starting to see it's not just ask your physician for advice, as we
Hmm.
used to see in all the drug commercials. It's now let's ask this TikToker for advice about
Right.
whether I should take this particular medication. So the FDA is having to respond to this. And then, of course, there's the reality that as government changes, as leadership changes, no
Hmm.
matter what happens coming in November, there will be changes to how the FDA behaves, to
Hmm.
how things are reacted, where the leadership wants to focus effort and money, and that's going to change how the government spends their time. What do they spend their time worrying about? What do they spend their time reacting to? And so we laugh that sometimes the regulations don't seem like they change, but it's
Hmm.
all the stuff underneath the surface, which is
Right.
what are they leaning on? What are they implementing? What are they spending their time enforcing? Where do they practice what we lovingly refer to as enforcement discretion,
Hmm.
which is it's illegal, but we don't have the energy and time to deal with this, so just we're
Wow.
not going to deal with that right now. And that's the stuff that can change quite quickly depending on changes in regulations, changes in situations, changes in technology, or changes in leadership.
Yeah. Is it a correct assertion to think of, and not to keep hammering on the FDA, but it's one of the biggest regulatory bodies that we have in the United States. Um, it seems to me that the velocity of change provoked by innovation might always be faster than the reaction time from the regulatory organization. So
Yes.
how do they keep up? It sounds like a never ending chase of finding what's ground truth from the perspective of the regulatory body.
I heard somebody say this in a way that I thought, if you're talking about your children, it would be one thing, but talking about the FDA, which is they do the very best they can. Um, so
Yeah.
the reality is that the FDA doesn't like to get too far ahead of things. There
Mm,
have been incidents in the past, if you go back and look at incidents, not the right word, but situations in the
mm,
past where the FDA has tried to lay down regulations, seeing things that are coming down the road. But by the time they go through all the things that they have to go through in terms of public comment periods and
mm,
making changes and listening to, all the sort of environment of people that are engaged, the information's out of date. The rules are out of date. This happened with 21 CFR Part 11, which is about electronic signatures. Every time the FDA would release a new draft version of this, by the time it got, close to being ready for implementation, it was all out of date.
wow.
And so the FDA has, this is not exactly a new thing for
Mm,
them. A lot of times what they do is they let industry lead and they try to work within the rules that they have, and then they come back and sort of build a structure behind
mhm.
this. So
Yeah.
as with everything in the justice system, in the legal system, a lot of times before there are rules, there is precedent,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
so we wait for the FDA. You, we always used to joke that the worst thing as a regulatory person that you want to be is to be cutting edge, because when you're cutting edge, that means there's no path for you to follow.
Wow.
We teach our students, of course, as a university, you can't plagiarize, you can't steal, you can't use somebody else's work. But the reality is, in the world of regulatory, we're going to follow the last guy in the same pathway that they went. If this was how they got through the FDA, we steal that same route and we go the same way that they went. But when you're the first one, when you're the
Mhm,
trailblazer, it's a lot of conversation with the FDA. You think about mobile apps and the first
mhm.
implementation of medical
Wow.
devices or software as a medical device on mobile phones, they were nightmares
Hmm.
because the FDA did not like the unlocked environment of me just using my own personal smartphone to run some
Wow.
app and do medical things with it.
Yeah.
And so the original phones were locked. And of course, that's an unrealistic way to handle this. It took the FDA kind of some time to thought of this idea and some precedent. And, one of the nice things about when we talk about predicates and that you let them do it. So we want to do it too
Mhm,
process. And that's kind of the way that we get going is that we use that precedent, that pre-existing pathway that somebody else got to go down. And then when it happens frequently enough, then the FDA says, okay, now we're going to write a guidance document.
mm,
They write a guidance document about that. And then if it becomes significant enough and kind of outside the regulations enough. They aren't new sections of the CFR to deal with this.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it's just, it's hard to lead when you don't know where anybody is going.
Yeah. And with that, Dave, thank you so much for your time and insights today. I don't know if you have anything else that you want to share with the audience. Where can they find more information about the graduate degree at UW, or when your article is coming out with RAPS? Anything else you want to share? You got a couple of minutes.
I will just promote the couple of things I always promote. The UW program is known as BRAMS, BRAMS. It can be found at brams.uw.edu. Or you can simply look up MS in Regulatory Affairs, University of Washington. Our applications for the new year close in August this year, and we're always interested in students who want to move forward in their regulatory education. And like I said, I don't have a definite date for publication, but we applied to join the fall release for the Regulatory Focus Journal from RAPS. So hopefully you'll be seeing an article coming out about risk analysis in machine learning medical devices, co-written by, like I said, a graduate student and I from the University of Washington, and a couple of wonderful colleagues from Microsoft Research.
Fantastic. Well, David, thank you so much. I'll see you around.
Absolutely. Thank you.